Hello. A very good evening to all of you. Don't worry, I'm not Professor Agnes Lam. The very elegant lady over here in white is Professor Agnes Lam. My name is Yvonne Long, and I work in the Independent Center, Independent Learning Center of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I am just here to open the talk, which is going to be given by Agnes in a short while. Just to give you some information about today's talk. Today's talk on appreciating Asian poetry in English is indeed one of the first events of the Power of Words, a reading and writing event for both the Chinese university community and the wider Hong Kong community. This year-long event, jointly organized by the Independent Learning Center, the Hong Kong Literature Research Center, the Office of Arts Administrator and Total Poem of the CUHK, includes a number of different activities, and they include blackboard and glass wall poems, all across campus, workshops on poetry writing and photography, a writing competition called A Day at CUHK in the 21st Century to celebrate our Golden Jubilee in 2013. Well, for those of you who have been following Asian poetry in English, Agnes Lam should be a familiar name. Agnes was born and educated in Hong Kong, like many of us here, before she left for Singapore at the young age of 19 for her university study, and later to America for her PhD. Apart from being a professor at the University of Hong Kong, teaching and researching, among many other topics, psycholinguistics and language education in China, Agnes is also internationally known as a poet. And some of her poems have been translated into German, Italian, and other languages. And I know some of your poems are actually translated in Chinese on the web. She has held visitorships from Fulbright, the British Council, International Research and Development Center, and Universitas 21. In 2008, Agnes was awarded the very prestigious Nosai International Poetry Prize, and she was made the Honorary Fellow in Writing by the University of Iowa. On a personal level, Agnes is a good friend and a great mentor. I find her words sensitive, feminine, and yet strong and powerful. And before I hand over the time to Agnes, I would like to share with you something which I like a lot recently. The power of words can move you to tears, evoke absolute joy, or lead you in action. There are words of encouragement, of sympathy, of love and admiration. The right words can give you strength, define your faith, give light to things that live in your imagination. Words will inspire you, cut you, bring you back to life. They will comfort you in your time of need. Words will nourish your soul. Now, can you all join me in welcoming Professor Agnes Lam?
Thank you very much, Yvonne, for such a kind introduction. And thank you, Elsie, for being here, and all the other colleagues for working so hard for my presentation. My voice tends to be soft, so if you can't hear me, please do raise your hand. Can you hear me at the back now? You can. Okay, so feel free to move in if you like. I want to thank all of you for being here at this time of the year, when the first assignments are probably due very soon. And you know, this is a late time in the day as well. Okay, this is like, it's not a Friday evening, you know, this is still midweek. And you still have to have classes tomorrow, and yet 6 o'clock we are here. I feel very honored. And to all the staff too for hanging around and staying behind and making all the arrangements. So I'm going to talk to you today about appreciating Asian poetry in English. So as I said, I want to thank the Independent Learning Center and all the other units that have already been mentioned by Yvonne, for this opportunity to meet you. The last time I came to give a talk, it was also to do a poetry reading. I was invited by the general education colleagues at that time, quite some time ago. And to be able to do this talk today, I actually went to do field work in many places. So I have to thank the poets for allowing me the copyright permission to use their poems, to talk about their poems, etc. And there were many people in different parts of Asia that actually helped me, received me at the airport, drove me around, helped me to find the poets and all that. So this is not just my work. And of course, the University of Hong Kong gave me the leave to do this. And my research assistants, Suhardeep in New Delhi, and Candice Ng and Kelly Jie, they were from Hong Kong. And of course, the Research Grants Council, for the grants to do the traveling and to employ my assistants. So I'm really so glad then that I have this chance to talk to you about what I've been working on for the last 2 or 3 years. So why am I interested in this topic? Is because, as you all know, English is very much used for education, in this part of the world. And because English has been increasingly used, people have started to think in English, and even not just people who are in literature, even people who are in other fields, they may read so much that they start thinking in English. If they start thinking in English, then they may have their own ideas that they want to express in English. Sometimes they write essays, sometimes they write blogs, sometimes they write short stories, sometimes they write poetry. Okay, so people are more interested to use English as a language for expressing their own ideas and feelings. So even if it is a multilingual or bilingual context like Hong Kong, people are still doing that. And this is particularly true of post-colonial places such as Macau, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Singapore, India, these places. The common perception, however, is that Asian writing must be about political or intercultural conflict. A lot of times when people try to publish these anthologies, they keep talking about the political aspects. And I think they overemphasize that. Because as a poet myself, and as I read the poetry of so many of the writers that I know in Hong Kong and other parts of the world, people using English as for creative expression, whether they write in Chinese or English or Malay or another language, they don't just talk about politics. They don't just talk about intercultural conflict. And I hope that my presentation today can help to correct this mistaken notion, this myth, that people, talk about politics all the time. Politics is there, but not all the time. And I hope that at the end of today's talk, you will have some idea of how to appreciate Asian poetry, just as poetry, and not just to think of it as some kind of cultural studies, and particularly political cultural studies. As I said, the concerns in Asian poetry are really much more wide-ranging, and they are of universal relevance, just like poetry in other parts of the world. So I've just done the introduction, so for the rest of my talk, I will talk a little bit about my project, so that you know how I got my data, how I found these poems that I'm quite trying to read to you about. And after that, I will look at some thematic concerns. I don't know what happened to the 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. It should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but never mind, okay? It is Microsoft Word, okay? So, so I will read you some poems, something like 7 poems to illustrate the themes. And then after that, I will give you a chance, if we have time, to analyze some poems, because you've all got the handout. And then after that, I will conclude. Okay, so just a little bit to give you some background about my project. I interviewed 50 poets, 10 from each of the following places: Macau, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines. And for the Philippines, I could only go to Manila. Philippines is a very large country. I couldn't go everywhere. For India, I could only go to Mumbai, formerly known as Bombay, and New Delhi. And I also, everywhere I went, I bought a lot of books, and my poor research assistants helped me to post the books, and we both carried the books. So we had to carry many of these books because many of these books could not be bought on the internet and could not be found except through the poets. And why am I interested in Macau? I'll be quite frank with you. When I first did my grant proposal, I was not going to study Macau. But after I got my money, I found this anthology that came out from Macau called I Roll the Dice, halfway, And then I decided, gee, so many people are writing in Macau as well. So okay, I'll work just a little bit harder. I will go and study Macau as well. And to me, it was very exciting to study Macau because it's like an English poetry being born in that place. And this is as you all know, Macau was not ruled by Americans or British people. It was ruled by Portugal from 1887, but it was returned to China in 1999. But even then, in addition to Portuguese, English is also a very important language for education. And the University of Macau also teaches some classes, some programs in English. So therefore, English is important in Macau as well. And then the second place that I studied was Hong Kong. And it was, as you all know, ceded by China to the British in 1842, and it went back to China in 1997. I need say no more since you all are familiar with Hong Kong. And again, some people, when they heard that I'm studying Hong Kong, they said, is there really people writing in English in Hong Kong? I know that there are people writing in Chinese, like, we have one here, Dogake, and also Yasi, all these people, they write in Chinese. But people ask, do they really write in English as well? But actually, yes, there are people writing in English as well. And of course, Singapore is the next place that I went to. It was ruled by the British from 1819. It became a republic in 1965. So, and because it was ruled by the British, it was very much an English-speaking place, in terms of education, particularly from the 1980s. They started to say that we will have this national stream of education in which everybody would be taught in English. And then they will also study their other languages such as Malay, Tamil, and Chinese, but as a secondary language, a language of secondary importance. Only a certain sector of the Singaporean young people would be expected to study both languages to the equal competence level. Okay? So therefore, English is very important in Singapore. For the Philippines, that's the next place I went to. It was colonized by the Spanish for many years, and then the Americans from 1901, it achieved independence in 1946. And it has a long, long tradition of writing in English. And there are several generations of people writing in English. India is actually the place that has the literature in English with the oldest age of these 5 places. Okay, it's well known that India was one of the first places that began writing in English in Asia. It was under British rule and domination for almost 2 centuries before it became a republic in 1947. And of course, some of these really famous poets, that are readable in English would be like Tagore. He won the Nobel Prize. And he was a very interesting person because he would be writing in Bengali, and then some of his Bengali poems he would translate into English, and sometimes he would write in English first and then translate back into Bengali. And then it wasn't an exact translation. He himself referred to it as a re-rendering. That means there's something similar to it, but it's not a word-for-word translation. And I think in Chinese you will understand this even more than ever because it's a very bilingual environment. In Chinese you probably more so than the university that I came from. Okay, and then you understand these things about translation. People are very bilingual here. Okay, But India, a very important place, and many famous names have come out, like Nissim Ezekiel, published by Oxford University Press, Don Morris, and Vikram Seth, all these people publishing. And most recently, Jeet Thayil, which was also one of the persons that I interviewed. I interviewed him as a poet, but he's much more famous as a novelist. In fact, he has just been shortlisted for the Man Asia Booker Prize. So we will know around October whether he won or not, but he was also one of the persons that I interviewed, but I'm not going to read to you his poem today. So that was my project. And now let me talk a little bit about the thematic concerns. Now, after reading all the poems from these 50 poets, and I have to be quite frank, there are like 1.5 bookshelves of materials that I have. I have not read every of their poems as carefully as I should have. Okay, but I focused on 3 poems from each of them. And I compiled them into a database, 150 poems, and I read these very carefully. And how did I get these 3 poems? I got them because I asked them, at the end of the interview, I said, can you introduce to me, can you talk about 3 of your poems? And then they will always ask, which 3? So I said, any 3, that you like me to introduce to other people, or that you feel, is particularly representative of you, or just poems that you particularly like. And most poets will tell you, I like all my poems, they are like children, it's so hard to choose, okay? But anyway, but after reading them, I find that, there are basically 4 main types of themes. And the first one is that they talk about self, the self, themselves, the inner selves, the awareness and inner consciousness, inspiration, identity, etc. And then the second main category will be, family, personal ties, love, relationships, friendships, etc. And then inevitably, there will be poems about society and country. Society, country, nation, history and politics. So as you can see, history and politics is only one sub-theme, within all these layers of meanings. And then a lot of them will go beyond the spiritual realms, talk about death, faith, religion, transcendence. Transcendence and is going beyond, what life is like, going beyond what you can see in everyday life. And of course, inevitably, there will be poems about writing, but I won't mention that. But I'm particularly interested in these 4 themes because it's like the 4 layers of our consciousness. You begin with yourself, then the people around you, then the wider society and your country, and then the universe, and things that we don't know so much, but yet things that are important still in our lives that we cannot help thinking about. Okay, when we look at the stars at night. So now I will read to you 5 poems from these poets. 1 from each place, 1 from Macau, 1 from Hong Kong, 1 from Singapore, 1 from the Philippines, and 1 from India. Then I will read you 2 of my poems. And for each of the readings, I will just mention a little bit about the context and some of the ideas, okay? So they are also in your sets, but maybe you can look at this one. Now, Jennifer Love Phillips married a foreigner, and this is her poem, Spotless Glass. Okay, she's quite an interesting person because her family history, they're not all Chinese. There is some Spanish blood there as well. Okay, but then they decided to settle in Macau. So she considers herself very much, a resident of Macau. Okay, so this is her poem, Spotless Glass. Looking through the window, the spotless glass doesn't allow wind or flowers, even a moment of hiding. As a dance on the stage, each gesture of the flowers predicted drops of rain, each merge tracing on the glass to be measured. I breathe out on the transparent glass, giving them some privacy, until I'm tired of breathing like this. In the wind steps, the merging of the rain, light goes, night escorts stillness back. in front of the window, in the spotless glass, I am the figure, judging. Now, the poet actually is trying to do something which I think we've all done, okay? At some point in your life, you might have been looking through a window and find that your breath actually condensed on the glass. And sometimes people would actually breathe purposely onto the glass so that you can play on it, you can do squares and circles on it. 玩井字, okay? Zero and crosses, people do that. Okay, but why is she doing this? In this particular poem, she is doing this because she feels that the flowers, are so naked. Everybody can see their every movement when they wave from one side to the other by the wind. And she feels sorry for the flowers, so she breathes onto the glass to give them some kind of hiding, kind of screen. Okay, but then it fades. And then it's sort of about herself. She feels that there is no hiding, You may be able to hide from some people sometimes, but then you can never hide from yourself. Okay, you will always know what you have done, what you think, what you haven't done, what you haven't thought. Okay, and how selfish you are, how selfless you are, you will always know. So that was the last line. She says, I am the figure judging. She knows herself too well. Okay? So this is very much a theme 1, the self kind of poem. And yet it is not without implications for the world around her, even for the flowers around her. Okay? Next poem. Lunch Hour Detention with Little Ming by Timothy Kaiser. Timothy Kaiser came from Canada. He married a Chinese wife, and he lives here in the New Territories with his Chinese in-laws. He is the vice principal of the Canadian International School. And he is a very, very kind person. From this poem, you can tell he is a good teacher. Lunch Hour Detention with Little Ming by Timothy Kaiser. Little Ming, Chinese mestizo, mother a distant Malay, stares down at his unfinished grammar, his classmates chapping outside with a basketball. There is no God, he says, typing harder with his pencil. No Buddha, no Jesus, no Mohammed. Little Ming's Malay mother was once his God. Other mothers tried to console her with cute clubfoot, but she sewed his disability nicely in gin, recoiled and repawed as she watched her flesh and blood trimp and tumble, far, far behind the other boys. Little Ming's Hong Kong father was next his God. After many phone calls, his father agreed. He would. Yes, he would. Mind you, he wasn't pleased about it. Take Little Ming for a while. No, just for a while. They met at Kai Tak. No hug, no handshake, no smile. His father God brought along one of his angels, who filed her nails through Ming's hair, leaned over, peered into his eyes, checking for lipstick smears. Cute clubfoot. Again, I go to China. Ming, business. You go to school. Lots of food in freezer. Siu mai, hagao. Microwave. Don't let in strangers. See you in few days. Oh, and if Uncle Todd calls, Uncle Six calls, tell him, I'll make up something. When you're 13 and your feet like half-inflated basketballs thud on concrete, and the voices of the gods ask you to leave a message before the sound of the beep, and the waiters at Pizza Hut change their names every week, and the wind rattles keys at your door in the night. good is grammar. Okay, it's a very sad story. It's one of Kim Kaiser's more famous poems. It has often been read. You might even have heard it read before. If so, I'm sorry that I bore you. But there is no poem which I think speaks of Kaiser as a teacher and a person so closely connected with the Chinese world, even though he himself is Canadian. Okay, he understands his students. This poor little child is only 13 and he has a disability. He can't walk as well as other people. Okay, and yet, he's always left alone. He's what you call these latchkey kids. That means he lives in his house all by himself most of the time. And he has to latch the key all the time. Goes in, microwaves his own lunch, but unfortunately, there are families like that. Okay, so you can say this is about the little boy, okay, but this is also about society. You can say this is about Hong Kong society, but it isn't just in Hong Kong that you get these stories. Okay? Next poem. From Singapore. I'll Make This Knife Talk by Felix Cheung. Felix Cheung was a student when I was teaching at the National University of Singapore many years ago. I did not teach him literature, so that he is a poet has nothing to do with me. It's not my doing. I taught him linguistics. Okay, but many years ago, I had known him, and he has become a writer, and there are many in his generation who have written poetry and sometimes essays, etc. And Felix knows Chinese. He can speak Mandarin. But he writes mostly in English, okay? And this particular poem is about a wife who has been so beaten by the husband that she decides to fight back, okay? So the title is, I'll Make This Knife Talk. Come any nearer and I'll make this knife talk. Swear it in your guts, cut you up and make you dinner for the dogs, which is what you are and where you belong. You dare say you love me? Knuckles again at the ready. Do you know my small hours, the small steps to inch your damage off? Rosary holding down the tremor in my palms, watching summer children and the lengthening, laughing shadows, lashing my heart. No, I am no longer your wife. I will not put it down. It is my voice now. I will not be put down. Notice this too, the little things at the end. I am no longer your wife, small letter I. I will not put it down, small letter I. It is my voice now. But the last one, I will not be put down, big capital letter I. Okay, so I don't know, I never asked the poet why he did that, but it could be that, the wife is finally strong enough. I'm not a small person anymore. I am I have an identity. I'm not just your wife that you can beat around all the time. So Felix has actually written other poems too. There was one time when he wrote a poem about a serial killer in the first person. Okay, in the first person as well. And of course, I don't think he has ever murdered anybody. Okay? Yeah. But he puts himself into the persona of the serial killer. Okay, so imagine what the serial killer is thinking. Read about serial killers so that he could do this. And there were some poems that he wrote which were about prostitutes, and he actually went to visit, some places where he could talk to the prostitutes so that he could write about them. And in this particular poem, he was putting himself into the persona, pretending to be the beaten wife, so that he could have the voice of the beaten wife in the first person, and then there is some more impact, rather than to say she, etc. Say, I will not be pushed down. I will make this knife talk. That means there is this determination there in the first person. Okay? But this is again very much a social issue, like domestic violence. It's written in Singapore, but in Hong Kong you have all this as well. If not, why would there be all these social workers that are needed to help young people and all that? Okay, all right. Now, next poem from the Philippines. It's Dear City by Constantina Cruz. Constantina Cruz teaches at the University of the Philippines. She's not much older than you guys. I think she was in her late 20s when I interviewed her. So probably, still around that age. So just maybe 5 or 6 years older than you, and she teaches there. And she actually studied in the United States as well. And she also tried to publish in the United States, and she succeeded. So this particular poem was written by her, and she has won prizes. She has won the famous national awards as well. Okay, the Philippines is very supportive of its writers and gives a lot of national awards. So this is about Manila, dear city. Permit us to refresh your memory. What comes from heaven is always a blessing. The enemy is not rain. Rain is the subject of prayer, the kind gesture of saints. Dear city, explain your irreverence. In you, rain is a visitor with nowhere to go. Where is the ground that knows only the love of water? Where are the passageways to your heart? Pity the water that stays and rises on the streets. Pity the water that floods into houses, so dark and filthy and heavy with rats and dead leaves and plastic. How ashamed water is to be what you have made it, what you have done to its beauty. Its graceful body in pictures of oceans, its clear face in a glass. We walk home in the flood and cannot see our feet. We forget to thank the gods for their kindness. We look for someone to blame and turn to you, wretched city, because we are men and women of honor. We feed our children 3 meals a day. We never miss an election. The only explanation is you, dear city. This is the end of our discussion. There is no other culprit. Now, what actually is this poem about? As you know, when the monsoon rains come, many places in Asia will flood. And the poor Philippines, Bangkok, all these places flood much, much more terribly than Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, if you flood, usually the next day, the flood will be gone. In places like the Philippines, they stay for weeks, sometimes even more than a month or 2. The rain that actually started I think around August, is still there, flooding the bottom floor of the helper I have at home. She wanted to post some things back, but she couldn't, because the whole bottom floor is still underwater. Okay, now, in this particular poem, Constantina Cruz is saying, the water is not at fault. The water is innocent. Water is clean. So what is at fault? It must be you. It must be the city. Because we can't blame ourselves. We are honorable people. We are honorable people. We go to elections. We feed our children. How could it be our fault? But of course, she is speaking very sarcastically here. Okay, how could it be the city's fault? What is the city made of? What is the city run by? People who threw the plastic into the rivers, who accumulated all the rubbish so that when the flood came, the rubbish would sweep into the water. So this is a very, very strong poem in that sense. But again, it isn't just about the Philippines. It's about our relationship, our sense of responsibility to our place where we live. And whether we live in Macau, Hong Kong, Singapore, Manila, Mumbai, Delhi, we all have a responsibility to the place where we live. It can only be as beautiful a place as we want it to be, and we make it to be. I think that's her message in that sense. So, she is writing about her society, she's writing about her city. She's not exactly writing about her country, but what is the country made of? But again, cities, villages, people. Okay? Next one, from India. I have to drink some water. Okay, the next poem is about Sukrita Kumar. She actually came to Hong Kong to judge a competition and actually visited one of the universities a few years ago, and that was where I met her. And later I met her again on other professional occasions. And she is again a very interesting person, slightly older than I. But she has published so much, and she has also published an anthology of women's writing, Asian women's writing, including works from even places like Afghanistan, etc. So another of her very famous books, which I admire, is her work about homeless people, people with no homes, like the people that we have in Hong Kong, sleeping under the flyovers. So she actually went to visit these people, wrote about them so that more people could understand what their lives were like. So, but this particular poem is not about social issues, it's not about national issues, it's about mothers and daughters. And she's looking at the wardrobe of her daughter. In the wardrobe of my child today, I found my baby journeying into